So why is it that Disney is acting against the interests of the people when they say things like, we want to have, as many as 50% LGBTQIA plus characters in our stories, right? Why are they acting against the interests of the people when they say that, they support teachers talking to little kids about trans surgeries or transgender issues at all without the consent of their parents, and sometimes explicitly against the will of their parents, right? Why is that so evil and so wrong? Well, one of the things that we know and have known forever about children, right, is that they are highly impressionable, and that the things that they hear about and learn in early life shape them and shape their souls for the rest of their lives. And it is the parent's job and the parent's right, to be in that delicate conversation with their child. If you give your child to a teacher, right, to teach them, you are again conferring upon them a certain degree of trust. That right to teach them comes from you and is given to the teacher. It does not come from God to the teacher, right? You are giving your kids over to the public school teachers or to whatever system you're sending them to, right? And you're saying, please act as my delegate here, right? Be the person, and you are within your rights. You're entitled to do that because you have the right to teach your child and to raise them and to shape their souls. That right was given to you by God. Now, when these people, take your kids away, or when they pipe their ideology into your TV set, right, they are effectively trying to counter message and counter signal what you might want to teach them. Again, it's not about, you may be perfectly okay with gay people. I am. I mean, you might have no objection to your kid eventually at an appropriate age growing up to learn that there are some people out there in the world who are gay. Or maybe not, right? Maybe you believe that being gay is a sin and you want your kid to hear that from you. You want them not to be, whatever. Certainly, I think we should all agree that kids ought not to be taught that, there's no such thing as gender. Everything exists on a spectrum, and you can take hormones to stop puberty, right? And you can transform your body or whatever. But which views you hold is actually less important here than the principle, right, about how kids' minds are being shaped. You have the right to determine that, just like you can tell your kids, what movies they can and can't watch. And why is this so important? Well, I want to read to you now from a couple passages, one of which is from Plato's Laws. So Plato, right, one of the great philosophers ever, from ancient Greece, right, in Athens, 4th century BC, student of Socrates, really the forefather of all our Western philosophy. And he writes near the end of his career this work called The Laws, which is kind of an update, really, to the Republic in which he imagined the perfect state. And in the laws, it's not the perfect state because that can never happen on Earth, but it's the second best state. It's like, what would the government look like if real people lived in it? To take their flaws into account. And one of the things that the Athenian, who's kind of the main talker, says is that kids have this natural connection to art. We see this all the time. Kids love music, right? That you can calm them with lullabies. And he observes this, Plato does, through the Athenian. Here's what he says. He says, inasmuch as choric performances, that is singing and dancing, right, are representations of character exhibited in actions and circumstances of every kind, in which the several performers enact their parts by habit and imitative art, whenever the choric performances are congenial to them in point of diction, tune, or other features, whether from natural bent or from habit, or from these causes combined, then these performers invariably delight in such performances and extol them as excellent, whereas those who find them repugnant to their nature, disposition, or habits cannot possibly delight in them or praise them, but call them bad. And when men are right in their natural tastes, but wrong in those acquired by habituation, or right in the latter, but wrong in the former, then by their expressions of praise they convey the opposite of their real sentiments. For whereas they say of a performance that it is pleasant but bad, and feel ashamed to indulge in such bodily notions before men whose wisdom they respect, or sing such songs, they really take delight in them in private. What does all of this mean, right? One of the great things about studying these ancient texts is that at first you sort of think like, this is beyond me. It's too complicated, right? Or perhaps it's just from so long ago that doesn't matter. But actually they're talking about things that are completely relevant and deeply human, right? Things that we still live with today. When you have little kids, right, what's the thing that you do before you can reason with them, before you can say like, well, fair is fair and you ought to do this or that? Before any of that, you tell them stories and you sing them songs. We have a natural human connection to art because art is how we express what's in our hearts, right? It's not just, the things that we can argue for, the things that we see in the world, but the way that we express our emotions, right? Our dreams, our desires, all the things that make us human. And so when we put those things into stories, into fairy tales, into myths, we're communicating certain values about the world. So, for example, when Prince Charming fights the dragon and saves the damsel, right? We're showing that heroism and courage are good, right? That marriage between a man and a woman is a beautiful thing that needs to be fought for and protected. All of these values that we communicate through story go deep into the soul. Plato at one point talks about it. It's like you're funneling this stuff into your soul through your ears. And so when a company like Disney, right, which tells these stories, which is in the business, right, of training the souls of children by telling them fairy tales and stories that are seen by millions of people around the country and all over the world, right, when they say that they want the world to look a certain way, they mean that they want it to look that way to your kids and that your kids are going to have their soul shaped. This is why we call them groomers, right? It's not because it's not because gay people are inherently groomers. It's because these people are intent upon shaping the psyches of your kids and prepping them to think about sex and to think about genders in certain kinds of ways that you don't want, or even ways that you haven't pre-approved, right? And so you, as a parent, have every right to say Disney is trying to infiltrate, just like these teachers that are talking about trans surgeries to kindergartners, right? You have a right to say, I don't want my child to have his psyche molded in this way, right? This is a big part of what education is all about. Here's Aristotle, Plato's student, and he's talking about music too, right? He says, we must examine. This is in his work, The Politics, Book 8. It is not the case that although this has come about, yet the nature of music is more honorable than corresponds with the employment of it. Mentioned that it's just for pleasure, right? And it is proper not only to participate in the common pleasure that springs from it, which is perceptible to everybody, but to see if its influence reaches also in a manner to the character and to the soul. And this would clearly be the case if we are affected in our characters in a certain manner by it. But it is clear that we are affected in a certain manner, both by many other kinds of music and not least by the melodies of Olympus, for these admittedly make our souls enthusiastic, and enthusiasm is an affection of the character of the soul, right? And since it is the case that music is one of the things that give pleasure and that virtue has to do with feeling delight and love and hatred rightly, there is obviously nothing that is more needful to learn and become habituated to than to judge correctly and delight in virtuous characters and noble actions. We get this so wrong when we say that, education is just about math or whatever. It is about math. You should learn facts in school, but you are also being trained, right, in ethical attitudes, things that you love, things that you hate, being trained to love the good, ideally, and to hate evil. And when a company like Disney says we want to tell your children stories that show them the world a certain way, it's not like they're not just telling you oh, gay people exist, or oh, there's such a thing as trans, right? What they're saying is we want to show this is good, and we want to instill this in the impressionable minds of children. There is no right that they have from God to do that. You have every right to shield your children from that. And the government, which has privileged these companies and granted them immunities that did not come to them from God, but were given by the government, which is your representative, which serves you because you are an American, has every right to take those privileges away.